Okay, folks, by way of introduction to today's session, I'm going to read a brief story from the Vinton, Iowa newspaper. Vinton, Iowa is home to less than 5,000 residents, but its library has stood the test of time. The doors of the library opened in 1904. However, right now, those doors are closed. Following the resignation of the interim director, the Vinton Public Library was left with no full-time employees. We felt in the best interest of the library and in order for us as a board to have a little bit of time to develop a plan moving forward, we would close for this week, said Jimmy Kelly, chair of the Vinton Library Board. The closure comes after Vinton community members expressed concerns about the books the library had on display. The books were part of a Pride Month display in the library. Government institutions like public schools and public community libraries have a legal obligation under the First Amendment to not censor materials simply because some community members don't agree with the viewpoints in those materials. Free societies read freely, said Mark Stringer, executive director of the ACLU of Iowa. This mirrors a troubling trend that we're seeing across the country. Books are being challenged at a record pace in a national culture war that has also led to bans on pride flags and state bills seeking to limit LGBTQ classroom instruction. Among the ALA's list of the 10 most challenged books, 8 of them were challenged for containing LGBTQ content. Libraries are trying to fight back. The Vinton Library hopes to reopen soon. But while we're waiting for the library to reopen, today's presenters will take a closer look at some of the books that are being challenged and/or banned and the reasons behind those efforts. Sylvia Ashwell will be starting the discussion talking about the history of LGBTQ book challenges in libraries, along with a discussion of how book challenges happen in libraries generally, and in our district in particular. Later, our second presenter, Brandon Wolf, will join us via Zoom to talk about LGBTQ book challenge history in schools and how they are handled in schools in the present day. So, Sylvia Ashwell has been at the Alachua County Library District since 2007 in a variety of roles. She's now the teen librarian at the Hawthorne Branch Library in beautiful downtown Hawthorne. She told me that in a previous life, she was a researcher in childhood typical and atypical language development. She's keenly interested and committed to equal access for all in public libraries, in library collections, and other library resources. Please welcome Sylvia Ashwell.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
The wood floor?
The wood floor? Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? I do sound a lot better over here. Welcome, my name is Sylvia Ashwell, and I am a librarian. I'm very proud of it for the Alachua County Library District. I've been working there for 15 years. And yeah, I've done many things, but I have settled on teen librarianship, which is a very interesting role in and of itself. And actually it does hit upon some of the issues that we're going to talk about today. And I have handouts, basically an outline that, will that go around or should I just wait? Okay. Okay. And brochures for the Alachua County Library. I have those. And there are 2 wonderful people in the back, Renee and Elizabeth, doing the royal wave. If you want to update any library information or get a library card from us, we would be very happy to do that. And they have the technology to do that. But welcome. And let me run over here real quick. How do I get? Yeah, how do I get?
I'm gonna go back.
All these stuff. Ew, God, I look awful.
Don't say that.
I look really bad. Okay. How do I do? Gotcha. Okay. All this modern technology. Oh, do I hit the control? That's okay. This is fine. I just wanted to talk with you today. I wanted to start off talking about banned books in general. And I'm trying to, there it goes. And
Can we see that share online, everyone?
can everyone see that just fine? Okay, this is American Libraries Magazine. This is the magazine by the American Library Association, or the ALA, which is the group that has a lot of oversight over libraries. They don't necessarily tell us what to do, but we like to follow their guidance. And the Office for Intellectual Freedom is the office of the group that deals with banned books in particular. And banned books, nothing new about this. You can see on the screen, there's some of the more popular banned books that have been or challenged, and as we like to say in the library world, challenged. And not surprisingly, this is something that of late has become much more of a phenomenon, much more of a thing. And this office got started in 1967. And again, they don't really tell us what we need to do, but they offer us guidance. I should also let you know that if you have any questions for me, feel free to just, shout it out, do what you need to do. And basically what they do is, it's part of the ALA that we support libraries with the freedom to access information. That's what we do. One of the things we do as librarians is we're told, okay, what if a kid comes into your library, wants books on gun? What do you do? Get them the books. If they want information about abortion, what do you do? Let them know. LGBTQ issues, what do you do? You give them the information. We're not here to tell anyone what they should or should not be reading or looking at in any way, shape, or form. We are here to provide that service to the public.
So I think when we shared the link.
Uh-oh, what happened?
It's open, so I'm going to stop share.
Okay.
And then, now I think
Is that doing?
Online, can you guys give me a thumbs up? Can you see it now?
Yes, we can.
Please say yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And something that they do, so the ALA, it's based in Chicago. They have many different things that they oversee. The Office of Intellectual Freedom is one of the more revered places. And what they do is they provide, there's attorneys who work for the ALA who help with any sort of court cases that may come up about banned or challenged books, et cetera. And also we provide resources for librarians to give them talking points, give them ways to think about how to interact with the public when it comes to these issues. And so they can all see this fine?
I can see it now, but if you're going to share another link,
We have to do it, okay. Oh, I didn't think this would be such a big thing.
this we can see once we stay on the link.
Okay. And again, something that we also do as an organization is we have a banned books week, which is near the end of September, where we showcase books that have been challenged or banned and give them pride of place in the library. One of my favorite displays was, it looks like a jail cell, kind of, like they're bars, like there's a little cage, and the books are in the cage. And everyone's like, okay, what is this? What's going on here? And we say, you're welcome. You're welcome to these books, as long as you're here. That's a nice little visual. Okay, so yeah, if you don't, do you mind? Yeah. I'll go to the next link, please. So the Office of Intellectual Freedom supports libraries, not just public libraries, it's over everybody, academic libraries, public libraries, school libraries, in their quest to make things freely available. Actually, could you go up to the frequently challenged books? Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. Let me see if I can get it back on. Back, no, not you. Let's see. And this is a website from the ALA. They have Banned Books Week. That's, yeah, Banned Books Week is near the end of September. And each year there are, the Office of Intellectual Freedom compiles a list of challenge books. And actually, could you go the top 10 challenge books? There you go.
Online, are we good? Everyone can see?
Can everyone see this? Yeah. These, I'm just going to read off some of the titles for you. Gender Queer, Lawn Boy, All Boys Aren't Blue, The Hate You Give, This Book is Gay, which is a book I really like a lot. But as you can see, what is the theme here? The theme here tends to be, of late, to challenge LGBTQ books that deal with issues around that. Gender Queer is probably, yeah, the most, in terms of a challenge book, that's the most challenged book across the country. Not so much here, but again, something that happens a lot. So what's changed over time, like if you look, there's The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, The Hate You Give, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. Those are issues related to race and class and all of that. Those are perennial issues. What is more topical, more new, are the books that deal with LGBTQ issues. And actually, it says here, I'm going to talk a little bit about book challenges and how we handle them, but I kind of want to save that for later. If you could.
Are you okay if I dim the lights a little bit?
Oh, sure. Yeah, dim the lights. It's much better not to see me.
What link are we going to, though?
Go to LGBTQ history and banned books. It's the third.
All right.
I'm not following the ncac.org. The top one, yeah, the top one.
Is that the one?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. All right, hold on. I got to share it.
All this technology.
Okay. Now.
National Coalition Against Censorship. This is a group that, it's a nonprofit that is primarily interested in any sort of LGBTQ, raising LGBTQ awareness, issues like that. Does anyone recognize this book? And Tango Makes Three? This is a kid's book. We would classify this as a picture book for children. Okay, just looking at that image, looking at that book, and that little guy in the middle there, what could possibly go wrong? Okay, this was one of the first books that talked about LGBTQ issues. This was back, when was it? The 80s, I want to say. Yeah, it's about penguins and a penguin's baby, but this is one of the first challenge books that dealt with gay issues. It's a nice book, actually. I kind of like the book. Okay, can we flip it down? Yeah, 2 male penguins raising a chick in the Central Park Zoo. The most challenged book of 2006, 2007, 2008. Interesting. But this book goes back further. And again, this is a children's book. So what is the problem if you say, okay, it's a children's book? Why would they want to ban a children's book? Of course, the thought of indoctrinating kids was bad. Yeah. So if you go down, so that's probably the one that's been most challenged, because the thought is we don't want young children to be exposed to this.
Keep going.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, you can kind of see. And some of these writers are very well known. Daddy's Roommate. I remember hearing about that. Yeah, these are all links of books that have been challenged recently. And something that you no doubt notice, school libraries, you tend to see a lot of, when you look at a lot of these banned books, you see that a lot of them are school libraries, which are a little different, and I'll talk a little bit about that too when I talk about library processes. Wow. The Homo Handbook, getting in touch with your inner homo. It's perfectly normal. Yeah, these are all, yeah. I mean, some of these might be familiar to you. And some of these are about gay or lesbian, prominent gay or lesbian folks. Okay. This just gives you a little illustration of how this happens, of the books that gets challenged. And as you can see, there's a button in the corner that says report censorship. It's something that you can do. And what they do is it's very similar to the ALA, except they're more broadly speaking about LGBTQ issues. They have lawyers on staff. They have folks on staff that can help you. Like if there's a court case that you want to bring to have a book brought back, that kind of thing. They have those resources available. And I hope I'm not stepping on your toes, Brandon, because you know a lot more about this than I do. Anyway, so those are just some of the more well-known books that have been challenged or banned. Can you go to the next link in that?
Right here.
Yeah.
This one?
Yeah. And again, ALA, this is our big umbrella organization for all libraries. And this is what we all adhere to. There's a Library Bill of Rights, which libraries follow. Again, it's not like we're told this is what you must do, but these are all good practices that have been developed over years. As long as we've had libraries, these are some good practices. And we've also, to help certain groups and individuals, we create a Library Bill of Rights to make sure that we treat everybody the same, fairly. And so this is something that is more new, that's been newly developed by the ALA. Again, the Office of Intellectual Freedom. And materials shall not be excluded because of the origin, background, or views of those contributing to their creation. The association affirms that books and other materials coming from presses that specialize in gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender subject matter and materials, regardless of format or services dealing with gay, lesbian, bisexual, and or transgender life, are protected by the Library Bill of Rights. So again, this is something that we as librarians feel very strongly about. Now, let me see. Yeah. But okay, so we have those, and we have those set in place from the ALA. What about our local libraries? What about our school libraries? And actually, if you can go to the local issues.
Right here. Okay.
Yeah.
This one.
And I promise I will be, I can just talk forever. Okay. Our governor there.
Yeah, let me share it.
Thank you so much for doing this, by the way. So, okay, school libraries and public libraries. The main difference between a school library and a public library is obviously libraries that are a part of schools are a part of the rubric of the schools. So any school board regulations, any school board things, school libraries are bound to them. And school libraries tend to have a lot more controversy around them in terms of issues like this, because what is it that parents feel? They want their children to be exposed to the right things. And in school libraries, they feel like they can exercise that jurisdiction. So any sort of laws that are passed by the school board or signed into law, if you can go down a little bit. Yeah. This was back in the spring. He basically DeSantis signed legislation. It was a Florida House bill to allow parents greater opportunity to review and potentially object to things that they find inappropriate. Now, what does this, so for school libraries, again, because they are more restricted in terms of they are more beholden to school boards. And of course, what do angry parents do? They go to the school board and they complain about, how awful their school is or how awful their school libraries are. So school libraries have that constraint. Now, what we can do is, and what schools can do, is they can fight back to some extent. I mean, they have the school board has attorneys. They could potentially try to bring changes over, but it's a little harder because, again, the school boards are under the aegis of the Florida Board of Education, and who is the head of that? Mr. DeSantis. So that's something, and that is something that you hear about in the state of Florida. There's been a big proliferation of challenges to books in school libraries. Not so much here. I mean, there is some of that here, but I think because we live in Alachua County and it's a university town, there's just a different feel to it. Now, what does this mean for public libraries where I work? It means that, we're a little different. I mean, obviously, we're funded by taxpayer money. So we are beholden to some extent to the taxpayers, of course. And in Alachua County, we're special. We have our own special taxing district. There's money that goes to the county. There's money that goes to the library district. So, we're good. We're good that way. But we do have book challenges. Thankfully, we haven't had any book challenges around LGBTQ issues or even really much of anything lately. The way that it typically will work with a book challenge, I think it works pretty similarly across public libraries, is somebody goes up to a staff member and says, well, I object to this book, or I object to this movie, I object to this being here. And they fill out, we have a little thing that they fill out. It goes to our public services division, which oversees all the public services parts of the library. And then an ad hoc committee is formed from there to review the book. And I actually did I did this several years ago. I'm trying to remember, I can't remember the title of the book, but the book was objected to because it was a young adult book and it had sexual content in it. So the parent said. So what that means is, for us, we review the book, we read it, There's a committee of 3 or 4 people, librarians. Typically, you'll have somebody who's like a youth librarian. You might have somebody who's more a reference librarian. The person who oversees public services division will be there too. And we meet, we discuss the book. We recommend for it to be kept or not kept. For the most part, what's happened is that we keep the books. We don't really, again, because of this freedom of access we want people to have. We don't want people to feel that they're things they cannot read. And our library district, and again, this area tends to be much more accepting of that. So it's not something, thankfully, we don't really see a whole lot of, but a lot of the surrounding counties, like Marion County, et cetera, and further on south, you do tend to see this. So that leaves me with, and I can't believe you guys don't have any questions.
Does anyone have any questions?
I promise I'll be done in a moment.
You want this last link here?
Yeah. Okay. I guess, yeah, the last link, and then Brandon's been waiting patiently for me to be done. And this is something that, and I highlight this because this is something, well, this came out a few days ago in the New York Times, and I think it's a very timely thing now. And essentially what can happen, and this is, I don't remember the state that she was in, but essentially what can happen is people can, depending again upon the governing structure of the library, people can report like to the county commission or city commission and complain about books. And apparently this is what's happening across the country. And this librarian was essentially called out for being trying to indoctrinate the children, accepting of the alternative lifestyle. And of course, she sees this at a televised city commission meeting because her library is under the city, and it was kind of sure revelatory. But again, the thing that we're about freedom of access. We're not about telling you what you should or should not read or look at. We want to make that available to everybody and have them make that decision for themselves. And I think I am done. No questions. I'm sorry? I'm done.
So we're going to have, let me turn on the light first.
Do I take questions now or should I wait till the end?
So Sylvia's part is done, and then we're going to have Brandon come on. So if you have a question for Sylvia here.
It would seem to me in this day of the internet that book banning isn't quite as valuable to the control freaks as it used to be. Is that not true? Because you can get the information online on any subject, as you know, and with a click and a question. You might not be able to get that particular book, but you can probably get around that too.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, kids have access. Kids can do things with the internet I can't even dream. Yeah. So it's more that their parents, people older, are more concerned, I think, about the book banning than not. Yeah. Unfortunately. Yeah. Yes, ma'am?
You don't really address the idea of age appropriateness as much, like the example you gave of one of the books that you had to review because a parent objected because they said it was inappropriate for that age.
Mm-hmm.
I agree, books should not be banned from a library. It's open. But can it be maybe put in another section of the library?
Now that's a possibility.
And
so I'm sorry I didn't mention that earlier, but yeah, one of the options we do have is, okay, is this appropriate for this age group?
right. And that,
You're exactly right.
and again, you get into the whole idea of school and school libraries. It's the age appropriateness that parents sometimes, disagree with. It shouldn't be in an elementary school if it's for a middle school child.
It's so hard. And just for me, because I've worked across different age groups, I've worked with adults, I've worked with little kids, and I've worked with teens. That definitely is an issue, the age appropriateness of the material, of course. That's, it's not something that we dispute. And we could potentially move something if we feel like, well, this is a little bit too much for a middle school audience or whatever the age is. Yeah, definitely we can do that. And that's usually what we end up doing. Instead of it banning a book outright, we'll just say, well, let's move this over here. But still, again, as I mentioned at the very outset, even if you're a young person, a middle school age person, you're interested in learning more about, let's say, abortion or something, some hot topic, I'm still bound to let you know, to give you as much information as I can to make sure that you can understand it. But also, I'm there to provide that for you. Now, there's something to what DeSantis is saying. We do want parents to, and parents should be paying attention to what their children are doing and reading and all that stuff. They should. I'm not saying that that's something that shouldn't be done, but it's not under our purview to do that. But you're right. And we always have to consider age appropriateness to everything.
Sylvia, I have one chat question and then we'll go to Brandon. It says, in the comment of the parent who was upset with the book, couldn't she just not allow her child to read it? Why ban it for others?
Yeah. The short answer is yes.
Okay.
That's the thing that always gets me about people. It's just like, and this is just me talking. It's like, okay, you don't want to, don't read the book. Find something else. Oh, sorry. Can people see me or not see me?
Well, yeah, they
Oh, right here? I'm sorry. Yeah, why can't, just don't read the book. Why do you have to ban it for everybody else? But that's a topic for another conversation. There's a lady here who has a question. Should I?
Well, let's go to Brandon just because of time, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, I promise. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Sylvia. That was from the librarian's point of view. Yeah, you're here. Okay, and again, if you have particular questions for Sylvia, at the end of the whole program here, we'll have a few minutes still. Now, where is Brandon?
I am right here. How you doing?
Okay, Brandon, hi. And let me just introduce you quickly here. Our second presenter this afternoon, Brandon Wolf. And he is a survivor of the 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando and a national advocate for LGBTQ civil rights and gun safety reform, a regular contributor in print and television media outlets. He has dedicated his life to tackling injustice and amplifying the voices of marginalized communities. He's co-founder and board vice president of the DRU Project, a nonprofit organization that creates safe spaces in schools for LGBTQ youth, provides college funding, and empowers champions in the fight for equality. Let's welcome Brandon Wolf.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mallory. And Sylvia, thank you for your incredible perspective. It's a tough act to follow. I'll do my very best. And I'm looking forward also to us answering some of those questions at the end. I'm going to try to share my screen. And you just let me know via audio if you can see it. We're good?
Mm-hmm. Just
Okay,
maybe
great.
go to full screen. Yeah, there we go.
I'm going to full screen now. Great. So I'll be able to see you. I won't be able to see the chat, but I will be able to see you, and I'll get through it. And then again, we'll have time at the end for questions. So obviously what you heard from Sylvia set the stage for what I'm going to talk about, which is very specifically the intersection of LGBTQ identities and this concept of banning books. Sylvia gave a little bit away of one of my favorite banned books, which is And Tango Makes Three. This is actually an ad that we ran on social media. We got permission from the author of this book to use it in some ads, drawing attention to efforts to ban book efforts. But of course, as Sylvia mentioned, much of the drive to ban books here in the state of Florida and around the country centers LGBTQ people. The history of banning books in our country, as you also heard from Sylvia, is long and pretty sordid. So I gathered some key dates for you so you can just get a real perspective on how long we have in this country been talking about banning books or whether it is appropriate to ban books. You'll see on there, I got a picture of the cover of Uncle Tom's Cabin, a classic book written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And Uncle Tom's Cabin is actually in many ways been identified as the first nationwide book ban in the United States. It is a book that was banned by leaders in the Confederacy, and you can probably imagine why, because it had conversations about race, it had conversations about slavery, and as a result, the Confederacy wanted to prevent people from getting access to it. So that happened all the way back in the Civil War era. We were talking about banning books. Then, of course, we saw Comstock Law. Comstock Law surfaced in the 1920s and really was about mailing of pornographic materials. So the law was a prohibition on the mailing of pornographic materials. But what made it so dangerous is that Comstock Law created a very broad definition of what pornographic materials actually were. It's a little vague, it's a little muddy, and as a result, lots of things got swept up into that, including things that had LGBTQ content inside of them. Comstock Law was challenged in the Supreme Court in both 1933 and 1957. The 1957 ruling actually narrowed the scope of what pornographic material might look like in the mail. It narrowed that scope so far that it allowed much of the content that had been targeted for so long to be read and circulated across the United States. Then throughout the 50s and 60s, we saw another surge of book bannings. We also saw an incredible resistance to that, but most of the books that were being banned were once again targeting conversations about race. They were targeting conversations about sexual identity, about gender identity. And while those who were pushing for book bans across the country may not have come right out and said the homophobic, transphobic, or racist component behind why they were pushing for book bans, that is what was driving much of the content being challenged across the country at the time. As I noted, book bans have been persistent throughout our history. They're as much a part of American life as apple pie or mashed potatoes and gravy at Thanksgiving dinner. And they have, of course, often been met by resistance throughout time as well, as people sought to secure the freedom to read. As I mentioned, LGBTQ identities have been targeted throughout the history of book bans in this country. In the 1920s, the novel you see on the right, The Well of Loneliness, which is written by Radcliffe Hall, it is a lesbian novel that was declared obscene by customs officials and was being not only banned, but also confiscated at that time. There are multiple works throughout the 1950s and 60s that were challenged. There were several book exhibitions and art exhibits that saw their content challenged. They saw people charged with criminal activity for exhibiting works that were considered, quote, homoerotic in nature. And then in the 1980s, and what is one of the most infamous banning incidents, a North Carolina senator went on an anti-LGBTQ tirade. He was trying to eradicate LGBTQ inclusive content across the board, and he successfully banned, at that time, the National Endowment for the Arts from funding what he called obscene works, which included things that were, quote, homoerotic in nature. Unfortunately, this goes beyond just book bans or art bans and trickles into public policy and especially public health. That same logic by that same senator was used during the HIV and AIDS crisis to block information that was helping to spread awareness about the disease to members of the LGBTQ community. There were cartoons that were created at the time to try to, in a creative fashion, get people to pay attention to the rise of HIV and AIDS and hopefully protect themselves. And in an effort to block that, the senator successfully challenged those comics and pulled federal funding from the CDC if they were to circulate those pieces of material to educate people on HIV and AIDS. So ultimately, the North Carolina senator who led the charge to pull funding if the National Endowment for the Arts would pass it on to obscene works, potentially cost the lives of people during the HIV and AIDS crisis as well. All of it targeting LGBTQ identities. And of course, we've talked a lot about what book bans and conversations about race and LGBTQ identities has looked like in this country, but none of that is unique to us. It's not unique to our culture. It's not unique to our identities as Americans. The whole idea of gay being obscene is something that has popped up around the world. One example is that in 2013, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed what they call the gay propaganda law. That's a law that is a ploy by, at the time, was a ploy by President Putin to shore up support from right-wing nationalists, not just in parliament, but around the country. Much like we see happening in the country today, right-wing extremists were calling for bans and censorship on LGBTQ inclusive content. And in service to them and their political ambitions, Vladimir Putin signed a law that says it is protecting children from being exposed to homosexuality. And the law openly opposes what it calls the propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships. The gay propaganda law has been condemned globally. It's been said to be out of touch with human rights law on an international scale. But unfortunately, it's also been used and seen as a model for other similar legislation. Unsurprisingly, legislation that has also reared its head here in the United States as well. Oh, let me go back one. All of this is really built on two different myths in my perspective. All of the fear about who LGBTQ people are, all of the concern about content being age appropriate or age inappropriate about our existence boils down to two specific things. The first is this idea that LGBTQ people are contagious. There is an insinuation in the banning of books or censoring of content about LGBTQ people that our very existence encourages other people to be LGBTQ. There is a suggestion that sexual orientation and gender identity are not inherent to who we are, but rather are a facet of social engineering. And that if LGBTQ people are present or visible, if young people are exposed to our very existence, then they will somehow have their sexual orientation or gender identity changed. Now, I just want to draw your attention to the first word on the screen, which is myth, and that is because that is entirely false. Sexual orientation and gender identity are a part of who we are. We don't choose them. There's no census form when we come out of the womb. There's no box to bubble on a form somewhere. They're just a part of who we are. And if we see a rise in people identifying as LGBTQ, in part, it's because we've allowed people to feel safe and comfortable doing that, not because we've changed their sexual orientation or gender identity, not because there is some sinister plot to influence people to be something that they're not, but instead we've told them that it's safe for you to be exactly who you are, that you're perfect, that you'll be celebrated, that you'll be affirmed. And as a result, more people are going to be likely to come out and share themselves with others. The other reason I call it a myth is partly because of the absurdity of the way we only apply that to LGBTQ identities. Think about what we're exposed to from the time that we're born. We're exposed to heterosexual and cisgender identities from the very time we come out of the womb. Heterosexual cisgender people are on magazines, they're on book covers, they're princes and princesses, kings and queens, they're in Disney movies and Marvel franchises. They're in our families, they're our friends, they're our neighbors. Heterosexual cisgender people are everywhere. And if it was true that the presence of someone who has a sexual orientation or gender identity would be contagious or rub off on someone else, it's highly likely that everyone on earth would be heterosexual and cisgender, because that's the bulk of the content that we consume from the time we're born. But of course, we know that's not true. LGBTQ people still exist. I grew up in a community that did not affirm or celebrate or make visible LGBTQ identities. And guess what? I'm still very gay. Despite all the efforts, I'm still just as gay as I ever have been. So myth number one that drives content censorship around LGBTQ identities is the idea that just by existing, we are contagious. The second myth is birthed from that, and that is the suggestion that if LGBTQ people are contagious simply by existing, that if our identities will be rubbed off on someone else, or if our identities are, even worse, a sinister plot to try to indoctrinate other people, then we inherently, by existing, pose a threat. And that is what has fueled the anti-LGBTQ animus behind censorship of content, behind book banning, etc. And it's not, again, new to any one era in time. I've included a number of different periods of time. You can see some are back from the 1960s and 70s. One includes our governor today, but they all have the same message, which is that we are protecting children from LGBTQ people. And at the core of that, again, is this myth that simply by existing, we pose a threat, and that the only way to challenge that threat is to erase us from books, from classroom instruction, from curriculum. If children are hidden from us, if they never come in contact with LGBTQ people, then there is the suggestion that they will be protected from becoming LGBTQ themselves. And what is incredibly dangerous about that is that people feel an innate sense, of course, to protect their children. All of us want to see children protected in our communities. We all want to see kids safe when they go to school to learn math and science and reading. And so this insinuation that LGBTQ people pose a threat to children preys on that natural instinct we have to protect our kids. And it distorts it and manipulates it into a place that allows for the peeling back of civil liberties, the rolling back of progress, and ultimately the censorship and banning of LGBTQ identities from classroom books, instruction, education. We're seeing this happen on a grand scale across the country right now, in a way perhaps that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. And of course, Sylvia mentioned a couple of the books that have already seen a rise in ban efforts across the state and across the country. I wanted to highlight a few more of them. The first one that you see on your screen is I Am Jazz, a picture book about Jazz Jennings, who's actually a Miami native. We're good friends with Jeanette, her mom, and of course her siblings as well. The book is about Jazz becoming herself, understanding what it means to truly be Jazz Jennings. The other book on your screen is a book called Call Me Max. It's, again, a picture book about a transgender boy who comes to understand who he is. The book is not pornographic in nature. It does not include sexual content. As you can see by the cover of both of these books, they're actually quite innocuous, and they go about talking about gender identity in a way that is designed to be age appropriate for young children. But of course, that's not good enough if you believe that LGBTQ people are contagious and that they pose a sinister threat to children by existing. And so we've seen both of these books challenged. Recently in Palm Beach County, Call Me Max was challenged by the superintendent, where he worked around their usual material review process to have that and all books with LGBTQ characters removed from classroom libraries in an effort to avoid having conversations about LGBTQ people at all. We've also seen a couple of other books that I think are even more innocuous than the ones that I just showed you. But if you're still made uncomfortable with the idea that transgender people exist and have always existed, then perhaps these books might feel like a bridge too far in the book banning conversation. The first one on the left is Everywhere Babies. It is a book, quite literally, about babies everywhere, in all sorts of circumstances, with all sorts of families. It is a book about how much we love and care for our children. This book has been challenged across the state of Florida because on one particular page, it features two moms sitting next to one another with their baby playing on the floor. Because it features a same-sex couple, it has been deemed pornography in schools by right-wing groups and has been challenged in school districts across the state. The other book that you saw in the beginning of my presentation and heard a bit about from Sylvia is And Tango Makes Three. I just also want to underscore that And Tango Makes Three, what I refer to as the Penguin book, is actually based on a true story. There's a true story of two male penguins forming a bond and raising a chick together at the Central Park Zoo. It has been turned into a very adorable cartoon children's book. That book is among the most challenged books across the country, again, because it features two male penguins taking care of a child together. That has been deemed pornography in schools by those who've challenged books across the country. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the way that public policy is driving much of this conversation in the state of Florida. The truth is that House Bill 1557, the Parental Rights and Education Law, or as it is sometimes known, the Don't Say Gay law, has driven, I think, and fueled a lot of the book banning conversations that we've been having over the last 6 months. The Parental Rights and Education Law is not very long, but most of it has nothing to do with books or content in classrooms at all. In fact, it's only 4 lines of that particular law that have anything to do with what might be considered in Everywhere Babies or in a book like And Tango Makes Three. That particular portion of the law says that classroom instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity may not occur in grades K through 3 and may only occur in an age-appropriate fashion from grades 4 through 12. We have long said since the beginning that this law was aimed in a very vague and broad and, quite frankly, unconstitutional way at erasing LGBTQ content from classrooms. We knew that it would be used to challenge a child presenting about their 2 moms or 2 dads. If a teacher stepped in to affirm that family, that it could be grounds for legal liability. We've known from the beginning that it would cause a chilling effect, that rainbow stickers that say this is a safe space on them would be peeled from classroom windows. We've known that rainbow lanyards that say I am an ally that teachers sometimes wear would be taken from necks. We've known that pictures of people's families would be taken down from desks in classrooms to avoid having conversations about the makeup of those families. And of course, we've always known that House Bill 1557 would result in more book challenges across the state, including challenges initiated by school districts themselves in order to avoid legal liability. I mentioned that groups have talked about this being an effort to eradicate pornography from schools, regardless of the fact that something like Everywhere Babies or And Tango Makes Three has nothing to do with pornography. They've still put them into this report with over 150 other books that is called the Porn in Schools Report. Those right-wing groups have been using House Bill 1557 as a vehicle to challenge books across the state, all the way from Santa Rosa and Pensacola, all the way down to Miami-Dade and Broward. Some of those school districts, as I mentioned, have been circumventing their usual processes. The Palm Beach County school superintendent issued guidance to the entire school district that requested that any book that's on the challenged list be removed and placed in a classroom closet, and that any book outside of that includes LGBTQ characters or discusses things like racism and oppression be removed from classroom library shelves as well for review by the school district. So across the state of Florida, we've seen a resurgence of the kind of book bans that we've seen throughout history in this country that have largely been fueled by myths about the contagious nature of being LGBTQ or the idea or insinuation that we're a threat to children. And the vehicle for those book bans right now has often been House Bill 1557, the Parental Rights and Education Law. So finally, I have to put in a plug for the work that Equality Florida is doing to push back against this kind of censorship, these kind of book bans, and to hopefully go on the offensive to create welcoming, safe, and healthy school environments for all students. In 2016, after the shooting at Pulse nightclub took the lives of 49 mostly LGBTQ people here in my home city of Orlando, Equality Florida launched the Safe and Healthy Schools Project. And the goal all along has been really simple: to create environments that every student can thrive in, and to pass the ownership of those environments on to school districts themselves. It's never been about conducting one training class for one round of administrators or educators, but it's always been about passing the onus on to school districts so that they fully understand and accept and acknowledge and own the responsibility they have to create safe, welcoming, healthy school environments for all young people. I'll end with this. These young people we're talking about, LGBTQ youth, feel the weight of book bans. They feel the weight of curriculum censorship. We often talk about, trying to protect young people from inappropriate conversations. And all of us can agree that parents should be involved in their kids' education. I think if you asked any school administrator or educator around the state, they would tell you they want more parental involvement. They want more parents showing up to PTA meetings and parent-teacher conferences. But unfortunately, when we pull back on inclusion, when we erase whole identities from classrooms, we have a detrimental impact on the mental health of the most vulnerable kids in our schools. LGBTQ students are at much higher risk of depression, of anxiety, and those same students are 4 times as likely as their peers to attempt suicide before they graduate high school. These conversations are about protecting all students, creating an environment where everyone can feel safe, that they know they're perfect exactly as they are, and that they have a place in this world too. We know that the same data that tells us just how disproportionately these students are impacted by mental health outcomes, that same data tells us that the presence of an affirming space at school, that ally lanyard or that rainbow safe space sticker, maybe that book on a classroom library shelf, cuts the suicide attempt rate in that population in half. These things are life-saving. So it really is about giving people access to information. It's about freedom of speech. And it's also about ensuring that every single student feels protected in their school, that they feel seen, that they feel affirmed, and of course, that every single family is respected in those schools as well. So I appreciate it. Thank you for letting me share a little bit. I'll stop sharing so that I can see all of you again.
We go to the audience. Any questions? Before we do, I wanted to thank you.
Brandon, this is a question from our Oak Room. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sure.
I wanted to thank you, Brandon, for coming back. You spoke to our group during our course on LGBTQ rights, and you're equally eloquent on this issue as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Great to be here again.
I have a question for you. You didn't raise the issue of Christian nationalism and the fact that a lot of the concerns about so-called pornography come from an effort by certain groups to try to make Christianity the national religion. There was an effort by a Jewish congregation in South Florida to challenge the 15-week abortion ban on the basis of religious freedom. And I'm wondering whether that's a possible way to address some of the bans on access to information that these attacks on libraries and books constitute.
Sure, I appreciate the question, and I also appreciate the honesty with which we are naming who's at the center of these conversation. Right-wing extremist groups, Christian nationalist groups are very often at the center of the book banning and censorship conversation. And it is driven by a desire to impose the Christian nationalist ideology onto public education. We know that part of the beauty of democracy is that we don't impose at one particular religious belief on other people. The First Amendment gives people a right to religious freedom, and it also gives people a right to freedom from religion. And as a result, it's important that our public education is entirely separate from someone's individual personal belief. So I appreciate that we're naming the folks who are at the center of this conversation so frequently. We see them operating here in the state of Florida. Groups like Moms for Liberty and others are driven by Christian nationalist ideology. And I also appreciate the question about challenging these things. I will say that there's really strong case law that supports access to books and information. It is very difficult on the basis of obscenity or pornographic material to effectively challenge a book or a piece of material in the public sector. That has been done over and over again throughout history, and the Supreme Court has seemed to err on the side of access to information and materials as opposed to, broadly stamping something as pornographic or obscene. I mentioned a couple of the cases that really defined that, 1933 and 1957 in particular, that narrowed the scope of what obscene or pornographic material really looks like. As Sylvia mentioned, those things do become more challenging in schools because curriculum is dictated by the Department of Education. There are certain things that we talk about, certain things that we don't talk about as it relates to public education. But ultimately, to answer your first question, we are a nation that prides itself on freedom of religion and freedom from religion, that we can all coexist in the same sector and that we do not impose our religious values onto other people. And that is at the core of the conversation of ensuring that classrooms are truly inclusive of all people, that they are not designed simply to cater toward one particular audience, but that they are representative of our entire society.
Thank you. We have a question here in our Oak Room.
Yeah, you're engaged in a cultural war in which being passive or pacifist doesn't gain anybody. I recently immersed myself into right-wing media to see where a lot of our population expresses themselves. And I ran into a phrase, for example, God doesn't make mistakes. And quite a few people will say this is all a personal choice made by the community to be gay or lesbian or trans or bi or queer. And in your first myth, you discussed this. This is the way we are. I'm suggesting that you need to be far more aggressive in getting this across to the population. Because the other side is very aggressive, and I would say your side is not.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's fair and honest criticism. I will say that part of the progress we've made on LGBTQ civil rights has been around people pretty unashamedly saying, this is who I am, this is who I've always been, my love is love, it deserves to be celebrated and recognized as well as everyone else. I think there is still a lot of misunderstanding of what it means to be transgender in this country. For many people, they've not come in contact with someone who's transgender before, or if they have, they haven't known because that person may not have felt comfortable coming out to them or being their authentic self. And as a result, we have a lot of education to do as a community, internally and externally, around the transgender and non-binary experiences in this country. But I will say that in large part, our country has moved on the issues of LGBTQ equality. If you look at Florida, just as an example, it's something like 70% of people in this state support comprehensive non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people. If you ask the people of the state of Florida, 70% of them believe that LGBTQ people should not face discrimination simply based on who they are. And so we have to, as you said, continue to share our stories unapologetically. We have to continue to be proactive in our message about this is who we are, this is who we've always been. And I think we also have to do education about members of our community that continue to be misrepresented, mischaracterized in an effort to paint all of us with a broad and negative brush.
I was, as a retired advertising expert, I would say you really need to take the gloves off.
Appreciate that.
Even what you're saying now is gloves off. His gloves on, you got to take them off.
Well, I don't want to get fired, so I'm gonna I'm gonna try to stay in line with what my boss wants me to say and do. But I will tell you, I am a fan of us being on the offensive, not simply playing defense all the time. And I agree. I think we have a lot of work to do there.
Thanks, Brandon. There's a chat question. I don't know if you can see it. If you want to comment, you want me to read it?
The only question I see, I think, is the one that we passed to you earlier.
Okay. It says, how can we get
Oh,
our
I see. Here we
mind-
go. Yeah, how can we get our mind around violence and gun freedom, seemingly supported by Christian nationalists? I wish I could get my mind around it. I don't live my life in fear of people that I may not understand or agree with. And so it's difficult for me to process how, a broad swath of the population could live their lives, celebrating essentially violent repression of other people that they don't understand. But I can say that part of, I think, what we need to do is tie the threads together, right? We need to be honest with people about how these things are all related. We've done some work talking to communities who are not maybe politically plugged in all the time and aren't totally aware of the issues that we're facing right now as a state or a country. And what was surprising to me to learn is that many of them don't see the rollback of civil liberties in different areas as connected, that they see them as sort of isolated fires that are burning on their own. And it is our job to tie them together and name who's at the center of them, that there is this aggressive movement toward authoritarianism, toward autocracy that is built on this idea that only someone like an autocratic leader like Governor Ron DeSantis can save us from the shadowy isms that are out there or ideologies that are trying to indoctrinate our children. That is the propaganda campaign that is being waged. It's fueling the banning of books. It's fueling the hostile anti-LGBTQ rhetoric that has led to a number of threats of violence against LGBTQ people across the country. And it, of course, is fueling this obsession with access to firearms and, the idea that we may need to violently overthrow our own government in order to protect ourselves from these, again, I'm using ideologies very loosely, from encroaching on us. It is our job to tie those things together and to be honest about how they're all working in tandem and how they are in furtherance of the ambitions of autocratic leaders who want to see themselves in very high positions of power. I was surprised, to be quite honest, that people didn't see the ties that bind all of these things, but it was a reminder to me of the work that has to be done to help educate people.
Brandon, I know we're over our time, but if you can, we have one final question here in our Oak Room.
Well, Brandon, you just took the wind out of my sail here. I was going to say that I see this as, quite honestly, Republicans using this as a wedge issue to get elected. That's the big deal. The bottom line is get elected any way you can. And whether it's pro-gun or ban books, there's several others too.
Yeah, thank you. I say this all the time that it's not as if we have made a lot of progress as an LGBTQ community. And it's not as if when we made that progress, opponents to equality just shook our hand and said, good game, and walked away. As if, okay, well, that's over. I guess we'll move on to the next target. People who oppose LGBTQ equality, they opposed it then, they oppose it now, they'll oppose it in the future. And they simply went back to their focus groups, they went back to their war rooms, and they began to ask the question, how do we roll back progress? How do we peel back the layers? How do we take back civil liberties that they've won that we don't think they should have access to? And they created some messaging, some language that largely centers the trans and non-binary experiences in this country. It's why you saw a pivot from talking about same-sex marriage and same-sex adoption to who gets to use the bathroom and whether or not the government should tell people when and where they use the bathroom. It's why you saw a pivot toward, who gets to play on a 13-year-old soccer team, and whether the government should dictate who is playing on which soccer team at which time. And of course, much of the book bans and conversations around curriculum content have centered transgender and non-binary people. That it has been about, well, I don't so much have a problem that you have two moms. Where I draw the line is you, as members of the legislature have said, turning my son into a daughter. That is the driving animus behind much of the conversation that we're having right now. And it is a marriage between what you're talking about, which is these opponents to equality, these right-wing extremists, Christian nationalists who have long wanted to peel back progress, and politicians who are just looking for an avenue to get to the next rung on the ladder. They want a new pin on their lapel, they want a new plaque on their desk. And it is the marriage between those two groups that has brought us this obsession with anti-LGBTQ policy, with book bans, with curriculum censorship. We're no longer talking about tax policy or how to help people's property tax rates come down or, help them pay the rent. We're talking about trying to erase people from, a third grade classroom library instead.
Okay, I'm delighted that both of you, Sylvia and Brandon, were here with us today to shed some much needed and welcomed light on these very important issues. And so I'd like to say many thanks to these two fine presenters. Okay, let's look ahead then to next week, when we will be hearing from Dr. Philip Wegner, the Marston Milbrow eminent scholar in English and an expert on the writings of, ta-da, George Orwell. And his topic will be, you guessed it, George Orwell, and particularly Orwell's 1984, one of the most banned and challenged books of all time. And so we'll get Dr. Wegner's insights into that question next week. And meantime, what I can say to you is keep reading.